topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. And lately we're doing a series on climate change and climate resilience, and that certainly overlaps with different forms of racism, environmental racism, and there's definitely, they're connected topics. And with all these disasters landing on different shores and sides of the United States, I have focused the conversations lately on U.S. citizens and things we can do since we consume more than anybody else in the world. And my guest can correct me today if that's incorrect. Just trying to encourage us to find simple ways and not to be overwhelmed, because there's so many crises in the world. It's easy to get depressed and overwhelmed. There's some denial, but more and more people are recognizing the reality of how climate change and global warming is affecting severe weather patterns. And I wanted just to mention that if you're interested in programs I teach as a diversity educator, you can find my programs on my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. I coach people in aligning their actions with their values. I help people recognize strong emotions as guideposts, but not states of mind to make big decisions on, to take the wisdom from emotions, but not necessarily make choices based on emotions. And I'm first and foremost a diversity educator and look at all aspects of diversity, from internalized oppression, healing trauma, and helping people recognize when we're perpetuating a form of oppression and aligning it with the value that people really, I think, stand by. I think everyone really wants to actually reach out and be inclusive. Perhaps not at this moment in time, but when you really get to know human beings, people really do care and want to connect with others. So I have a lot of different ways of structuring it and tailoring trainings for people interested in that. And right now I'm learning so much about climate resilience. And today I have a guest that I would like to read an intro, because I just want to make sure we cover the main points before we bring out Leslie Crenna. Leslie Crenna is the communications manager of Cool Davis, a group of community volunteers and university students committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Cool Davis facilitates collaborations between individuals, organizations, and agencies so that they can work together, which I love this, what can happen when you collaborate to adapt and thrive in the face of climate change. That is so hopeful to me. Leslie is also the campaign manager of a current campaign that they're calling Household Engagement Campaign, which is developing workshops to be held at apartment locations to get folks engaged in sustainability, and to also helps them save money and to be prepared for climate impacts. I just love this kind of like, this is where we're at, attitude, and we can do things about it. In fact, I titled the show, We Can Cool a City, because I think that's so powerful and empowering and encouraging. And just a little quote from you, Leslie, before you join the conversation. We are in the planning and development stages of the campaign, focusing on the renter households and household sustainability and resilience. And you can also mention that you guys have moved forward with a climate movie circle group, which is a great way for people to begin to engage. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bahia. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. And it's really interesting to hear about your work. And that was a fabulous introduction. I feel like you covered it.
Well, I want to do Cool Davis justice because I so appreciate what you all are doing. Just coordinating a city, that's a big deal. Different agencies within the city. And let me start with asking you, how long has Cool Davis been in existence, and how did it start?
Yeah, so Cool Davis is actually a nonprofit. We do work closely with the city of Davis. And we have 50 volunteers at any given time. So even though we are a nonprofit, we are heavily community-based. And so we were founded in 2010, which was not that long after the state of California started requiring climate action plans for municipalities. And there was a big push in the city of Davis to respond, basically, and make plans. We were completely volunteer driven until a few years ago when we became a full nonprofit. And we have a coalition and a partner network with lots of other nonprofits in town. Like True Davis is an example of a nonprofit that has, mission overlap for sure with us. Planting trees is definitely one of the things that we all should be doing as much as possible. But there's lots of other organizations like the Interfaith Alliance for Climate Justice. And we've started to reach out and work more with some county level organizations. And there's now a county level commission, Yolo County Commission, covering the climate emergency. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you're a community member. And so you said it used to be all volunteer, but now is there, as the manager, is that now a paid position?
Right. Yes. Now we have staff, and we're actually hiring right now. So anybody out there that lives in Davis, California or Yolo County, please take a look at our website, cooldavis.org, and look for those opportunities.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I know that you provided some graphics, and I'm not sure if that's how you wanted to describe things, like begin sharing information by using the graphics. Would you like to start that now?
No, I thought I would. You and some of our back and forth in preparation here, you gave me some really great suggestions about what to chat about. Great. And I think telling a little story or giving some background about me and about those volunteers that I was talking about would be a nice way to get started.
Perfect.
Yeah, so my sustainability story, or my personal story, is that I grew up in San Francisco. And, I went hiking. I really cared about nature. I did recycling. I was, someone who cared. And, anyone who's listening to your broadcast right now and this interview right now is probably also someone who cares. And that's a really good, important thing to acknowledge. And then I became a school teacher for a while, and later on was living in El Dorado County, raising my children, and had been a school teacher, as I said, a classroom teacher, but then I also homeschooled my kids. But I found that I was driving upwards of 2 hours a day to, get them here and there in classes and that kind of thing. And it just didn't feel right to me. So in 2012, I moved to Davis and discovered Cool Davis. And really, that was the moment in my life where I made that shift and dedicated myself professionally and personally to sustainability. Um, one of the big differences was that I was, living in a small town where almost everything that I needed was walking distance or biking distance. And Davis is super famous for its bike infrastructure and how easy it is to bike and how many people do bike to get around. So that was a big part of the attraction.
Yeah.
And that's a good segue because, Davis is a college town, and it's one of the largest UCs by admissions, enrolled students. And those students come from all over the world, all over our country, all over the state, with lots of different experiences. But that's what's really amazing about it as well, because it is an amazing, diverse set of people in the community who, come from another place, speak maybe one or two languages, have visiting scholars from all over the world are here. So it's a really interesting place to be doing this kind of work. And there are lots of youth activists as well in our community who are very passionate about this topic, and I've been demonstrating and nudging and demanding, city council, county counselors, all the way up to national, international level. In fact, there is a youth activist from Davis who is, at an international level, been advocating for reductions in fossil fuel emissions. And some of the students, it's really amazing to see. And some of the students, the young adults and students that I work with, are part of the Climate Movie Circle, but are also helping me plan this upcoming campaign.
So 2012 is when you moved to Davis?
Right.
And when you made this decision, you said, okay, I mean, sounds like an intentional move, like where you could walk and bike, and that you had the option is phenomenal. So many people don't have the option to live in Davis.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more about like your conscious thinking, like what were you going to do besides try to walk and bike versus using a car for 2 hours? That's a huge difference. And you were already recycling. What else did you see just as you're sort of beginning of making this commitment? How did that grow into different actions?
Well, there are a lot of things you can do, but I think I want to get into those further on.
Okay.
It's because, what I did is things that anybody can do most of these things. There is kind of a divide when you own your home versus when you rent your home. And I was actually a renter in Davis for the whole time. And in fact, just moved to Woodland recently. So I'm in Yolo County. But that is affordable housing is a huge issue in Davis. And
Sure.
It's a huge issue across the world. And climate impacts are one of the drivers behind that issue. So
such a good point.
Yeah. So and working remotely mostly at the moment, but I'm able to borrow an electric vehicle from a friend when I go into Davis. So that's been helpful. And I have an e-bike, and so I like to take that into town too. Well, although that takes about an hour, so that's a big commitment, even with an electric bike. But yeah, we could transition to the first slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you're ready, DJ, our wonderful sound engineer in the background will set that up for us. There we go.
Okay. Fabulous. So this is, most people in California are believers. And actually a majority of Americans are believers, but not everyone. The majority of the world are believers. it's important still to kind of talk about the science, and just so everybody has some idea of what is going on here. So,
Leslie, I'm just going to interrupt for a second,
yeah.
because some of our listeners are listening on the radio, all over, from all over the world, but they can't see the graphic. Can you just like say the title and describe it also? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for mentioning that, reminding me. So the graphic is about the global atmospheric carbon dioxide parts per million. And this, so basically it's measuring how much CO2, carbon dioxide, is in the upper atmosphere measured above Mauna Loa, the big island in Hawaii. It goes through Scripps, and there's several organizations, including NOAA, that collaborate on gathering this data and reporting this data. And when I started working for Cole Davis, and as communications manager, and also more recently with this campaign, I've had to dig into this information and learn it. And the fact that this graphic is showing, that is so astonishing to me and remains astonishing, is that the global atmospheric carbon dioxide parts per million has not been above 300 for the past 800,000 years. And this chart is a little out of date. In 2016, it was almost 403. So the science has determined that 350 parts per million is a reasonable, safe upper limit. In 2016, we were at about 403. And today, any guesses?
I'm afraid to guess.
Okay, well, it's still in the 400s, so that's good. It's about 419. So from 2016 until today, almost 16 additional parts per million. So it is rising, clearly. So why does that matter? That carbon, and I won't go too much into the science, but that carbon basically creates a blanket. It's gases that concentrate in the atmosphere that were not there originally, and it creates that blanket that traps normal sun energy in our lower atmosphere.
Normal sun energy. It traps normal.
The greenhouse effect is a normal scientific process for heat energy from the sun to pass through the atmosphere, but normally more of it is able to leave. It's getting trapped, basically, by these gases.
Okay.
So, obviously, as you mentioned, there are emissions, global emissions by countries all around the world, and the impacts that you talked about that are causing these extreme heat extreme heat waves and flooding and all sorts of secondary impacts that are, as you said, they can be really overwhelming. But there is a lot that we can do, so we can work on that. But we can also talk about, I like to take on the myths around this, so we can show that next slide and talk a little bit about beliefs and myths.
Okay.
And I'll just say, that's the that's not the correct slide. Oh, that's 4. You're right. DJ had it right, and I had it wrong. So the slide he's showing right now is global emissions, and it's interesting. This source is on the US EPA. It's showing around 2015 10,000 million metric tons of emissions. Well, I just went looking at some other sources. I'm putting together a slideshow presentation that we'll be delivering to organizations, and that number is potentially not accurate, and it's much lower than I've seen from other sources, international sources. So that I'm finding very interesting. And the other thing that's interesting about these, some of the science or the information is that this particular chart is talking about emissions from fossil fuels. Well, that doesn't include other types of emissions, and there are some very large ones that I can talk about later also.
The things are worse than this graphic is reflecting.
Yeah, but it's hard to have. When you're talking about science and these numbers, sometimes if there's no context or no comparison, you don't, what does that mean, right? A lot. Right. The upshot is a lot. Yeah. So, and I guess I want to just, and this is relevant to your topics and your theme of your program, that emissions are primarily coming from China. Actually, is the largest emitter. USA is second. Okay. India is third, and of course those are highly manufactured, high manufacturing countries that eat a high carbon diet, and most of the rest of the world, just is, accountable for much smaller portion of those emissions. And in fact, I guess I've been playing with all sorts of graphics lately.
Thanks for so it's China, the USA, and India in order. Do you have even percentages or any numbers around that?
I don't have it on the top of my head, but China and USA are very close. Okay. India's maybe half. I'm just going by an image that I have here.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's see. So these impacts and the emissions and the impacts are not equal. That's the basis of what's important to understand here. And communities of color, communities on coastlines, small communities, island nations, communities that don't have a lot of resources to bounce back from flood damage to their home, or wind damage to their home, or can't afford, don't own their home, or can't afford to get solar on their home to insulate themselves from power outages. All of those sorts of things make the impacts of climate change unequal. And that has become, the world community is become very aware of that, and there's finally been some talk about providing adequate funding for fairness, basically creating some equity in the space. I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert on the science, and I'm not an international level player. But that's some of the basics.
So on an international level, they're recognizing more the inequity of the impact, and at least talking about maybe committing to creating equity in terms of resources for, what do you call it? Climate repair, climate rebuild?
Yeah, I'm not sure that, so reparations, of course, is a term that's been used in racial justice circles, but I don't think that term has been used. There's a phenomenon called planned retreat. So there are especially small coastal communities that have started to engage in moving uphill, basically away from sea level rise.
Makes sense.
So I believe in Alaska and some other island nations, but there are island nations that cannot, do not have a high enough elevation to move uphill. And those are some of the strongest activists at the international level, as well as representatives from island nations that don't have the ability to retreat above the sea level rise projections. So to bring it back down to kind of the local, back down from the international level, we're here, right? We can act here. We can act every single day as an opportunity to have more sustainable practices and to help solve this problem. I think I want to skip to slide 4. DJ, if you could bring that up, great. So there's a lot of reasons why people might feel kind of paralyzed or overwhelmed. This is overwhelming. It's a tricky, it's, for instance, the young people growing up today, it's a really different reality for them than it was for older people.
It really is.
Sorry?
It really is.
Mm-hmm. And so they have a different, they have some different challenges. They have some challenges that we didn't know. We had challenges when we were younger, but this is honestly much more enormous. But some of these myths and realities, one of the big myths, and I do hear it from youth sometimes too, which is, I always want to say, no, people do care. There's a myth that nobody cares. Too many people are in denial. And people do care. And a lot is being done. And the vast minority are the denialists, way outnumbered by the people that believe and care. And a lot there's been a lot of good news of late as well at the national and international level. So although we haven't made the progress we want to make, it's not due to a lack of caring, that's for sure. Another myth is it's the ultra rich, it's not us. And that, I'll say just to start, there's a kernel of truth to all of these myths. But I want to...
Can you clarify, what does that mean? It's the ultra rich, not us, that what? What's
so
that?
The ultra rich tend to consume and emit much more than the average person.
So that's the myth.
Yeah. So executive jets and having multiple homes and those kinds of things are equate to wealthy people having a bigger footprint. And so there is a kernel of truth to that. It's not just a myth, but to some degree, we enable some of the ultra rich, we enable through our consumption patterns and through celebrity, perhaps. And you've seen recently, there's been a lot of there's been activism targeted at the ultra rich, and there has been sort of social media pressure, actually. And yeah, I can keep reading. I have the slide up in my own space, so that slide can come down if you'd like. And so another one is too expensive is another myth. And yes, renewable energy, creating new sources of energy is expensive. But if you look at the costs of the damage from extreme weather and heat waves and other impacts, we can't afford not to spend and invest that money. So that's another myth that's really not true. Population. Sorry?
I just want to underscore everyone that you're debunking that we cannot afford to.
We cannot afford. We can't afford not to invest in the future. We can't afford not to respond to the climate emergency.
Okay.
It is. If you look at insurance losses over the past decade, it's staggering. So that's an expense, and then of course using up resources is an expense that doesn't really get accounted for necessarily.
Such a good point.
Yeah. And then population. So a lot of people say, well, it's because there's 8 billion people on the planet. Yes, that is a problem. But back to the ultra rich thing, we don't all consume the same. And if we were all consuming at a more reasonable level, then population would be less of a problem. But I won't go into the details there, but that's an important thing to think about. So a person in Africa, a person in the Middle East, is not having the same effect as a person in China, India, and the US. And of course, India is a very stratified country, so there's big difference among their population. Technology can save us, right? Are we trying to go to planet B here with all these rockets? And, there is a planet B, but it is beyond us. Okay, all the Webb telescope images are telling us that, of course, there must be other life out there, but we're not going to reach it, certainly not in time. So there are other technologies that are helping us, but they alone cannot solve this problem. And then government needs to take care of this. Of course, the government needs to take care of it. And some governments are, some are not. And at the local level, your municipality should have a climate action plan if you're in California, and show up to that council meeting and push, find out, read that article, find out, read that report, read that plan, and do your part to help government move forward, because government sometimes comes up with requirements that there's pushback on. It's happening in Davis. It's happening at the national level with gas and electrification. And they need support. The government needs to know that the people support these requirements. So when there's pushback, it's important to have pushback on the pushback.
Great.
The one that has no truth to it at all is this is just a normal cycle. So this is not a normal cycle. We've had over that 800,000 years glacial and interglacial weather patterns. But this warming pattern is happening 10 times faster than any previous warming patterns.
Wow, 10 times faster.
Yeah, that is not normal. And then second to last, it's too late. Well, it can feel like it's too late sometimes, but it's too late to avoid some impacts. We're already experiencing those impacts. What it's not too late to do is shorten that period of time that we're experiencing those impacts. How long is it going to be before we emerge on the other side? So it's not ever going to be too late for that. Now, there are tipping points, and again, I'm not a scientist, but it's not a reason not to try. Absolutely. And then the final one that is really, really key, what I do doesn't make a difference. Well, I hear that a lot, or people may not be willing to admit it, but if you dig a little deeper, they say, I'm just one person. And I always compare that to voting. So if you had that same attitude about voting, you would never vote, because you would make the argument that, well, my one vote doesn't make a difference, even though sometimes votes have been coming down to 1,000 or at the national level, and at the local level, people win by single votes. It's really amazing. So, and all of what's happening now is happening because individuals took actions. So it's the only power we have.
Hmm.
Now, we can get together as groups and multiply our power, but that's part of what you do as an individual, right? You get together with other people and exercise your power. So just some tips and tricks. Let's see. So I guess I want to ask you, do you want me to kind of go into some details of what people can do that they might not already be aware of?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And before we transition, I just want to reinforce some of the things you said that are really good to hear. It's like, it's so good to be, clear out the misinformation, my misunderstanding, and get to know what is actually effective and true. And it's interesting that the minority, denialism is the minority of people, not the majority of people. And as I said in the beginning, as a trainer, I totally believe people care, and that we have to sometimes help them find that within themselves, depending on their life experiences. And that it's great news, national and international. Yes, there's been progress. We can't afford to not do this. And I love this concept. I probably would take a long time, but to keep doing something like if we all consume at this, even much closer to the same level, that would reduce the problem of the number of people that are populating the earth. And your encouragement to be active in the local level, like you don't have to have a college degree or higher to go to your city town hall and say, what's the climate plan? You don't have to be a scientist. You just have to be someone who cares.
That's right.
Read it with a friend, and think about it, and then go back with a voice, because you're right. So many times the government they need to hear from us. So I think and I loved also that you pointed out, like, there's not really a planet B. There really isn't. And I don't know how many people actually think that there is, but it's just really like, yeah, just let's get more and more and more reality checks. And that this is not a normal cycle. And we should know, things are heating up 10 times faster, and that it's not too late, like, to help us step out of the feeling that can paralyze us, that like, oh, what can I do? I'm just one person, and isn't it too late? And there's like, step out of that anxiety, take a deep breath, trust there are things to do, and find people like Leslie Crenna at Cool Davis, or, go to your city, find your people, like, because I'd rather die trying than not try, than give up, and this gives me a lot more hope that we can at least slow things down. And you said it even more positively than that we can we can shorten this heating up cycle.
That's right. Right. We can emerge sooner because we're in it. We are in it.
Thank you for letting me take that time just to recap what you said. Yes, people would love to hear more what they can do.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I didn't share. Well, let's see. Let's quickly. Maybe we'll go to that slide 5 at some point, but I'll probably try to go a little faster now. So I have a slide I didn't share, but it's about transportation. So I'll just sort of describe it. Transportation is, in some ways of accounting, thought of as the greatest share of our emissions in Northern California, and California generally, in the 70% typically. But that doesn't include everything. I'll just say that. So your choices that you make for transportation are really key. And there are access issues, and not everyone can choose the mode that they would like to choose, but there are things you can do. So the lowest emission way to travel is feet, bike, scooter, e-scooter. They have neighborhood electric vehicles, walking, jogging, running, active transportation. So not those E things. The next is taking the bus. The next is an electric vehicle, which apparently, according to some information I'm looking at here, it can be more effective than even taking the train because trains are not necessarily full.
Mm.
If you're commuting somewhere where there is a train line, I highly recommend you fill up that train. That can make it super efficient. And then, diminishing returns, a combustion car, and then, of course, air flight. So, and I'll just have some really specifics about air flight. So air flight is incredibly cheap in the grand scheme of things. There are two things that you can do. One is to get economy class. So get the cheaper class. It saves you money. And the more people they get on the plane, the less the emissions. Mm-hmm. Flying nonstop is better. But there's also certain airlines that have been using sustainable aviation fuel. One of them is United out of LAX, and another one is Frontier. So if you look up those two, you can see they have some plans. And the other thing you can do is big tech, I'll mention Google, has something called Google Flights, and it actually they have taken it upon themselves to calculate the emissions factors for flights as you're searching for them, and it's a fabulous tool. It's better than any flight searching tool I've ever used. It will pair you with two one-way legs that are lower emissions and cheaper often, in a way that a lot of other sites and airlines don't necessarily do. So you might take one airline out and a different airline back. Mm-hmm. And so I highly recommend that tool.
And it's called Google Flights?
Google Flights. So just type that into your address bar and it will come up.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then just in general with travel, start with, okay, can I call ahead and find out if the furniture store has stock, or, if, to make appointments, etc. Send emails, do video conferencing, conference calls like we're doing right now. Try all those things first before you, bump up to walking, transit, car, etc. Try to start low on the pyramid of emissions when it's coming to travel. Energy, there's all sorts of things that people can do. The three that are the biggest bang for your buck, biggest impact, are LED lighting, which has become almost ubiquitous. It came out of LED lighting was kind of born at UC Davis, as far as I understand it. So that's exciting. Line drying your clothing.
Oh, for sure.
Saves you a ton of energy, and your clothes last much longer and they dry much faster than you'd think, even in the winter. There's lots of different rack styles you can use. And I actually don't own a dryer at my home, and I haven't owned a dryer for about 10 years now. And, it took my kids a little while to not be annoyed with me, but it works. And then finally in summers, and if you're in a hot climate, opening your windows, if you have that ability to open your windows, and sense of safety to open your windows. Opening your windows at night on summer evenings is a really great way to cool down the space, and then leave them open till even mid-morning, and then close all those windows up again. So those are some things that everyone can do. Homeowners, plant shade trees, insulate your attic. That's really important. Get your ducts clean, your HVAC ducts cleaned and sealed. And electrification is a big push now too, because natural gas is essentially methane. And natural gas has a global warming potential of in the 30s, I believe. So it is 30 times more of a effect than carbon dioxide. So it's like the equivalent of sending up 30 quantities of carbon dioxide, you know, 1 to 1. So,
Wow.
yeah, natural gas is something we have to work on, and there's been a lot of pushback lately on that, but it's going to have to happen. And then lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about consumption, and we can bring up that slide number 3.
Great. We have 4 minutes left, so.
Oh, okay. We better go quick.
This is great, Leslie.
Oh, I'm glad. So there's a little bit difficult to see, but this is something that our Climate Movie Circle has brought to my attention. The Climate Movie Circle is, we're in our 4th month, monthly screening and discussion group in Davis, and everyone is welcome. This slide is not directly from the movie Eating Our Way to Extinction, but that's what we watched this month already. And what this shows is emissions due to animal agriculture. And it really is a shocking quantity. And what I didn't share is, so Latin America is has the greatest, and India and East and Southeast Asia, which is primarily China, have quite a bit, and then US is next. So the thing that is sort of mind-blowing is, okay, that's a lot of emissions. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what percentage it is, because that seems to vary depending on who you talk to, what source you go to. But what is more astonishing is when you look at, so that can come down, the distribution of mammals on Earth. There are, so mammals, this is Our World in Data. I highly recommend visiting Our World in Data if you like to look up such things. 62% of global mammal biomass is livestock and pets.
Pets too.
Well, pets is less than 1%. I don't know why they put the pets in the heading. It doesn't. It's really
scare the pet owners.
35% of global mammals is cattle. 12% pigs. Humans are 34%, and wild mammals 4%. So there is 1% more biomass of cattle on this planet than humans. There are 8 billion humans, yet there is more mass of cattle than humans on this planet.
That's thanks to the mass meat industry, mass meat marketing industry.
Right. So I'll just say, consumption-wise, we have 3 choices every day to eat less meat. You don't have to become vegan. You don't even have to become vegetarian. Just eat less and start there and see how it feels. Get good at making lentils and beans and all of that good stuff. And then also consumption. Oh, I had a quiz, but we'll have to do that another time.
We'll have to have you back because we have about 1 minute left. Oh,
right.
So do you want to make your closing statement since we have to wrap up?
Yeah. So just talking about hope, I'm glad that you found hope in some of those myths, because they can feel overwhelming. It's like going through grief and stages of grief, and you probably have experience with that. But expressing gratitude for what we do have is key for your mindset. Seeing the progress that's out there, finding the people who care and are talking about it, like us right now, and then understanding your impact and knowing how you can make a difference, how you can live your values, how you can be in alignment with what you believe, with what you do is really at the core of this. So that's what I recommend people to do.
Perfect. That's what I call core alignment.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I will get some of the information and we'll see if we can post that somewhere. Thank you so much. I know that we have to wrap up the show. So I want to also thank the listeners and the viewers. And I want to mention Leslie Crenna is from Cool Davis, and you can check it. I think it's cooldavis.org. And thank you to our DJ, our sound engineer DJ, our producer, Dean Piper. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4TV or W4CY.com. And may we all have more enriching conversations in diversity this week. Thank you all again for listening.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate